What's up, everyone? It's King Moosh here, and welcome back to our class overview series for episode 5. If you aren't already familiar, the class overview series is a collection of informative videos where we're going to be discussing the different classes in Fire Emblem Three Houses.
We'll be going over general information about each class, like their certification requirements, stats, abilities, and their overall strengths and limitations to determine their viability and what units are a good fit for each class. As per usual, these videos will be gameplay focused, so there shouldn't be really any major spoilers aside from the one spoiler which should be obvious by the subject of the video, but I advise you anyways to watch your own discretion, and if you haven't played Three Houses yet, you absolutely should.
For this episode, we're going to be tackling the Death Knight class. This class is unlocked automatically at the beginning of Chapter 13 of the Crimson Flower route. When Jeritza joins a playable unit, he will automatically be certified for and classed into Death Knight, making this a zero investment class. It also goes without saying that this class is exclusive to Jeritza. No other unit can use it. You are not required to use Death Knight for any battles. However, when he is first unlocked, your options to reclass will be very limited since there are no lecture days before the mission. Notably, he can instantly reclass into a Paladin with his starting skill ranks, which is one of Death Knight's biggest competitors. Overall, having a free class from the get-go is always valuable, though in this case it is a bit less valuable in the other unique character exclusive classes we talked about in the last 4 videos, as Jeritza joins with such high skill levels by default. The only advantage in terms of ease of investment between Death Knight and Paladin are the relatively inconsequential costs of one advanced seal and 1 day of certification exams, which can make it very slightly longer to go back and pick up early game masteries like Death Blow and Hit plus 20.
Death Knight is a 7-move cavalry class, which puts it in line with a decent amount of the other cavalry classes like Cavalier, Dark Knight, Great Knight, and Holy Knight. Similar to Byleth and Light in One, it is somewhat of a hybrid class as it grants bonuses to physical weapons, in this case lances, while maintaining access to Jeritza's spell list. However, the emphasis seems to be leaning more towards the physical side since the first class ability is Lance Fair, which boosts lance damage by 5 while lacking Black Tome Fair, Black Magic uses times 2, or any other class abilities that would benefit magic specifically. As such, his magic is simply just available as a secondary option while primarily being a lance-focused cavalry class. The mastery ability of Death Knight is Counterattack, which in my opinion should have also been the base ability of Death Knight itself while also being its mastery. Regardless, Counterattack is definitely a strong ability, especially since it can be used on him with any class such as Wyvern Lord. In general, this doesn't always completely synergize with Jeritza's playstyle, as he can work as an enemy phaser or player phaser, but however he is built, his damage output is generally high, so always being able to counterattack an enemy from any range is nice. I'd say depending on the build you want to run on him is the deciding factor on whether or not you want to pick up this mastery, but it is generally a useful one and doesn't hurt to pick up anyways.
So the base stats of Death Knight are quite frankly horrible. However, they don't matter at all because Jeritza joins with stats that are all much higher or at least equal to these base stats. So basically you won't get any stat increases upon certifying into this class, which makes sense because it is the class that Jeritza starts in when he's first unlocked, and his base stats are very good, so there won't be any issues here in that regard. As for the stat boosts, they are actually remarkably good, possibly one of the best sets of stat boosts in the game, if not the absolute best. If I could identify one weakness with this spread, is that it lacks a dex boost, unlike Paladin, which provides a +2 to dex. That's really where the weaknesses end. Its +5 to HP is tied for the second highest in the game with the tanky armored classes Fortress Knight, Great Knight, and Armored Lord. Its strength is also extremely impressive at +4 while mounted, which ties with Wyvern Lord, and +3 while dismounted, which is actually 1 higher than Wyvern Lord. And whether mounted or dismounted, it is higher than Paladin, which is a +2. The defense and res at +3 each are also quite good, and along with the HP they establish Death Knight as a pretty tanky class. But possibly the most interesting stat boost here is the speed, at +3 while dismounted and +1 while mounted. Much better than Paladin, which has a +1 while dismounted and a punishing -2 while mounted. Having a positive speed modifier is actually very useful for Jeritza, since he is tied for the second highest speed growth in the game at 60%, has a solid base speed stat as well, and uniquely he's the only male unit with access to Darting Blow. This makes him able to double a good amount of enemies even on maddening, and because of the stat differences, Death Knight is more suited to this playstyle than Paladin. As for skill level bonuses, this class grants a +3 to Lances, Reason, and Riding. The Lance and Riding bonuses are standard for cavalry classes but definitely helpful, especially considering the high base skill levels that Jeritza starts with. It won't take very long to reach A+ in Lances for Lance Prowess 5, and in Riding for Movement +1, and potentially even S Lances for Lance Crit +10, which naturally synergizes with the Scythe of Serial. The Reason bonus is a bit unorthodox, but is also useful since, as previously mentioned, Death Knight allows access to Jeritza's spell list. He only starts out with Thunder by default, which isn't a very useful spell, but the Reason boost can allow him to push for Thoron and Death at ranks C and B respectively, which are much more useful because of their increased range. In summary, the stat boosts and skill bonuses are well distributed across pretty much all the areas that Jeritza specializes in and benefits from.
Yeah, and as always, to finish up the statistics, we need to examine the growth rates. Jeritza gets a fairly standard 30% boost to HP growth, along with a 10% growth rate boost in both strength and magic, and a 5% boost in defense and res. The class also has a minus 5% speed growth penalty, which isn't terrible, especially since Jeritza has the aforementioned whopping base 60% speed growth, has access to Darting Blow, and combined with the fact that he starts at a base speed of 27 means he will always be really fast. This speed penalty also isn't harsh as some of the other mounted cavalry classes like Paladin or Great Knight. Generally speaking, the growth rates are genuinely pretty good and are arguably better than some of its most comparable alternatives, such as the previously mentioned Paladin, as well as Dark Knight. Thankfully, you acquire this class at a time where the growth rates on most classes are endgame ready, so it is nice that if you want to keep him in this class, you aren't sabotaging him statistically. Additionally, unlike Enlightened One and Mortal Savant, I wouldn't say the magic growth is wasted, as the two spells Josh mentioned earlier, Death and Thoron, have that +1 range allowing for decent chip damage from afar. This is much better when compared to Byleth, who has a subpar spell list, while just wanting to use a regular strong sword of the Sword Creator is better in most situations. Overall, Death Knight's growth rates are definitely good while having a stat penalty in a place that barely matters given how cracked Jeritza's speed usually is. Meanwhile, the 10% to both damage stats are nice considering he has use cases for both, especially in maps where it's difficult for cavalry to traverse. Jeritza's base defensive stats are actually quite high at 52 HP, 24 defense, and 18 res, meaning the growth rates in those stats are appreciated, as if he can make it to the front lines, he's more than capable of tanking a few hits, even in maddening.
Death Knight is a class that has some strengths that are really obvious and some that are a bit less easily identifiable. Obviously, Death Knight shares many of the same strengths as other cavalry classes, with an above-average movement stat and access to Canto. This makes Jeritza much more flexible in combat, especially during the player phase, and increases turn efficiency. As mentioned before, the stat boosts are strong, easily on par with, if not better than most master classes, and better in pretty much every way than his closest competitor Paladin. With the strength stat boosts and lance fare, since lances are already a strong weapon type, the damage output of this class is really solid, especially if you take advantage of brave lances. While Jeritza's magic capabilities aren't anything special, access to his spells is helpful, mostly because of the 3 range options with Thoron and Death, as well as occasionally getting some free heal XP if you bother to push through his Bane and Faith through HD. It can also be very helpful against armored enemies or other enemies that have much higher defense than resistance. Finally, counterattack is a very unique and fairly strong mastery. Notably, it can be a bit easier to pick up this mastery compared to some of the other unique classes because Jeritza comes with Mastermind. It's not completely necessary to have it as an ability when you have access to Retribution as well as the Chalice of Beginnings from the DLC, but it's definitely still useful to have as an option. Jeritza's stats and access to Battalion Wrath do make him a good candidate for dodge tank enemy phasing builds, which counterattack slots neatly into. However, for this type of build, there's really no benefit of staying in Death Knight compared to switching to Wyvern Lord, so the time spent in Death Knight will likely only be temporary. Still, this class can be a very valid zero investment option for a lot of players, and for others, it can at least be worth spending some time in to bridge the gap while trying to certify for another class and to pick up its mastery along the way.
As you can tell, in terms of unique unit-specific zero investment classes, Death Knight is surely a viable option. However, there are a few shortcomings that are worth pointing out. As for Jeritza himself goes as a unit, he doesn't really have any specific reason that would dictate him as a lance user. Obviously, he starts off with high lance skill ranking, but his axes aren't too bad, and his selection of lance combat arts are nothing special, really. As such, a unit such as Jeritza is most likely most optimally suited for Wyvern Lord, as are a lot of physically strong units. Additionally, it does have some weaknesses compared to its closest competition, Paladin. The boosts are about on par, but with the Paladin class, it has one extra move as well as the extra ability Terrain Resistance. Although this doesn't sound like a huge deal, it actually segues into the last and most major weakness of the class, which is being locked to only Crimson Flower. As cool and strong as it is having the Death Knight be under your command, the unfortunate reality is that it's locked to a route that is not only shorter, but has multiple maps in the last couple chapters that are extremely unfriendly to cavalry. This often means Jeritza will struggle catching up as he will be forced to dismount multiple times throughout some of these missions. Paladin has the privilege of being a regular advanced class not confined to one route, and as such, other strong units such as Sylvain can take advantage of it, especially since Azurmoon doesn't have the same issues with cavalry units. The class definitely doesn't have too many actual weaknesses, but it's hard to overlook being locked to one route where you want as many flyers as humanly possible.
As for a final rating, I would give Death Knight a 7.5 out of 10. As previously mentioned, the biggest weakness of Death Knight is definitely the fact that it's locked to Crimson Flower. Any other route would give it a better chance to show off some of its unique advantages. Regardless, as a mounted, primarily physical class, it is automatically going to be pretty strong no matter what. The defense, res, and speed boost of this class actually work surprisingly well together, because when paired with Death Blow and Darting Blow, you can one-round a lot of enemies by doubling them and just tanking the hit in between your two attacks. Even on turns when you can't one-round an enemy, you can still achieve a decent amount of value in this class by using Thoron or Death for safe chip damage. With 2 strong class abilities, great stats, and a solid mastery, this class is definitely above average even with the limitations of the route that it's stuck in. If you're planning on using this class as your endgame option, it will definitely be good enough, but you may want to consider raising your riding to pick up movement +1, or just give a movement stat increasing item to Jeritza so you can keep up with your other mobile units, especially on those maps with difficult terrain for cavalry where he's forced to dismount.
As for the tier list placement, we're going to slot Death Knight into the upper echelon of B tier. It is definitely a good class statistically with access to decent utility from Jeritza's spell list along with a strong mastery. However, there are definitely other viable options that could arguably be better for Jeritza, such as Paladin and especially Wyvern Lord as we mentioned. Regardless, the one major thing that keeps his class from ascending higher is definitely just the route it's locked to, as we've mentioned multiple times. It cannot be understated how detrimental this is to him, and it's honestly, you could argue in any other situation it would be a lower A tier class. But as it stands, the Death Knight will be remaining in B tier.
That's about all there is to say about Jeritza's unique Death Knight class. If you like the video or have any thoughts of your own, please leave a like and make sure to comment.
I also recommend checking the description if you're not already subscribed to both our channels, especially now since we are alternating channel uploads.
Death Knight marks the end of the character exclusive classes in 3 houses, but there's still a couple more unique classes to go. Make sure you check out episode 6 over on JCross channel, where we'll be discussing the Dancer class.